Alright guys, hello and welcome back. I made this big thing last video about like, oh, I'm going to reset the league and it's going to be great, and then the first thing that shows up is Pile Wither. And that's actually something I'm interested in, so guess I didn't have to reset too long. Tournament's not for anything we care about, so we're just going to let that one expire. But yeah, we are taking on the Bhed Psyches, Luca Goer is taking on the Kilka Beast, and the Guado Glory is taking on the Ronso Fangs. Well, let's jump in. Let's kill it. Let's do it. Let's do the stuff. Let's do the sphere shot. I don't know. It's like we're in this weird moment, and I talked about this a little bit ago as well. But we're in this weird moment where it's like, what's the least worst option of tech copy, right? Because so much is so unlikely, you know. So much is near impossible that it's just so I don't know. It's hard to justify any decision, right? Like that's the thing we have a problem with. Yeah, but we got Barrack here. And then let's push right side and see if we can get Blappa set up. Kind of touching back though on the I actually just faced the Bhed Psyches last game too. Cool, good for them. But touching back on that, techniques are awful and terrible to learn. Train I was on. One of the biggest hurdles I think actually is the techniques for our forwards. So Blappa and Eager. We have the original team signed, right? So because we have the original team signed, we know what these teams achieve at high levels. So Zamzi Ronso goes to like 55 catch, Nizru goes to 60, Keepa is not signed and we don't talk about him because that's awful. Nimrok not relevant because they're not trying to score on him. Guado Glory's Noi Guado goes to like 53. Like what I'm trying to get at is those are all fairly respectable. Maybe Noi doesn't go that high, but those are all fairly respectable stat lines. And I don't think Blappa or Eager get that much shoot. Like they don't actually. They're not insane, right? Like that's the biggest hurdle. They don't become like juggernauts. So we're gonna have to figure out, like, is there a realistic opportunity? I wouldn't call it an opportunity for us. Is there a realistic possibility that we start tying these games in the end, like, heavily? I think there is. I think there's a real chance of that occurring, and the culprit will be Blappa and Eager's lack of techniques. I think that's my short analysis of what could happen, which is definitely a bummer, but we'll have to see how it goes. And I will say this, I've done a few journeys now. The levels are not identical. So if I get my team to 99, it doesn't mean the opposing goalie is also at level 99. They should be, in theory. But the auto leveler doesn't work that way. They might be at like level 95 or 96, which is not that far off, right? Like that's not crazy. That's not like a huge, difference, but it is relevant, or it could be relevant depending on what stats increase last and such. But yeah, I think it's definitely in consideration. I will say, and maybe this is a little bit too much confidence, if I did tournaments alone at the end game, I would 100% win those matches because I can't tie a game. I think the biggest issue is going to be us tying games. It's just us not being able to finish out a team, right? Like that's the biggest concern. I don't know. There's probably an argument for just doing tournaments in the end, but I don't agree with it. So the argument for tournaments is you get a more legitimate game in that you know who wins and you know who loses. But as part of the journey, we also want to get techniques, and it's a near fact that the techniques learned in League are just better. Or maybe that's just in theory the tournament should be able to show a lot of these techniques as well, so maybe that's just I'm being silly. But it's something where we use techniques a lot to get, or we use tournaments a lot to get techniques. But League's even more so sometimes, so it just depends. Yeah. I guess my core point is I'm doing the leagues even in the late game most likely because I want to get techniques, and that's what really matters. And the techniques in tournaments, or the ones I seem to see most often, are ones that we already know. You know, I see Brawler, Elite Defense, stuff like that. I don't see Sphere Shot showing up in tournaments very often. Anything like that. I mean, granted, I don't see Sphere Shot showing up pretty often in leagues either, but I have seen it before. It's just a hurdle, right? Like it's just this like the decision of like what we're gonna play and stuff. You know, I guess we could like set a real strict, maybe not strict, but an actual schedule, right? So we have a league and then we have a tournament and we just alternate that way. So we do like a league leads up to a tournament, we play in a tournament, and then we play another league, because it's almost like simulating seasons at that point, right? You got your league season, and then your league ends with a big tournament, and so on and so forth. Granted, this game doesn't really discern the difference between the two as much. I mean, it does brackets, it does all that stuff, but teams don't play differently in tournaments or anything, so it's a little bit disappointing. I don't know. There's a lot of opportunity that just isn't touched on in Blitzball for sure. Yeah, Blappa level 51. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff I probably haven't even touched on that is like additional. I mean, something I've actually never mentioned, I don't think, is the idea of alternate players. Like this, like we can have bench players, but no other team does have bench players. Like, it seems odd. And I know I get the reason the reason they don't is because they don't want to limit the actual player in signing people. But I think there's some value there, right? Like it's kind of fun. Like if you're, let's say I'm playing against like the Bhed Psyches and they got Mayu in, and I'm like, oh, they got Mayu in, cool, whatever. And then they swap in Nimruk in the second half, and I'm like, oh no, like this is like the variability can add some enjoyment to it. And it's all subjective, right? It all depends on like what you actually prefer, but they don't set alternate players. In fact, and I hope I'm stating something correct here, I think I've actually set alternate players on opposing teams. No, I definitely have, because so here's the thing, on the original on the last journey, the Kill Kabis, I set Dotto as their 7th player, and they never swapped him in, and it was probably because he was defined as the 7th player, so he was on the team, but he wasn't ever playing, like in 200 or 300 games, which I think is a pretty good sample size. I think 200-300 games is good enough, right? Like I mean, there was like a, you know, no game, no, in those 600 opportunities, they never fielded him. 600 because half times exist. You can swap him in halfway through the game, but yeah, like it's a little bit of a bummer, and it could have been additional to the depth of the game, but I don't know. I think it all falls under the same umbrella I talk about a lot, which is I'm getting really in depth here, but Blitzball inherently is a mini game in a main game. So in development cycle and stuff like that, if your decision is between setting something up for Blitzball versus setting something up for the main game, you're gonna just work on the main game because it's the actual thing that people are buying. But if they ever did make an individual like Blitzball, like if they were going to recreate Blitzball in any form, I'd hope they'd make some substantial differences. I know that can definitely be a rocky ground to touch because people get really impassioned about that stuff. Of like they changed it, but in a way I didn't like. This might be really simplistic because I'm not like a Nintendo like super fan or anything, but I like the way Smash Bros does it. It feels like enraging the comments here maybe, but it feels like in Smash Bros, in terms of like the game and stuff, it feels like they don't really subtract as much stuff so much as they just add a bunch of stuff. I mean, I think specifically in like characters and stuff, like I don't think, has there been a Smash Bros where like a new one's come out and they've just cut characters out of the game entirely? I feel like they keep everyone and then they just add more and more and more. But I like that kind of same instance for Blitzball, which I know is selfish and leads to more, you know, development, but like keep the Final Fantasy X 2 mode, keep Final Fantasy X, Make them optional. Like give the player options, right? There's no reason to cut things out. I mean, I guess there is a reason. I just said it was development and stuff, but it's tough to balance out. I was actually reading an interview that was about Blitzball. It was gosh, who was it with? I forget who actually gave the interview, but they were talking about like Final Fantasy 14, and this interview is not recent. It's like a year or two ago they had it, and they said one of their biggest challenges was implementation. And they said, like, well, how do we implement it? Can you recruit like random NPCs in the world? Do you like control the character? Like what does it feel? And that dialogue inherently, and I know it's translated, so it's a little bit rougher to figure out if that's what they actually meant, but from what it sounded like is they were looking for a solution, like a way to implement it, but not multiple ways to implement it. They weren't looking at like we could do this and this and this and give players options. It was just like, this is how we are going to implement it, and this is how players will play it, and that is the end of the line. So that's what I understood from like the interview, which, I mean, I guess they were just talking about signing players in that example, so obviously there would be like one way to sign players. It doesn't make sense to make multiple ways to sign players. But yeah, I really, really like the idea of NPCs in Final Fantasy 14 being recruited for Blitzball players. I think there's a vast like well of like just possibility there. Yeah, Eager level 51, more HP. Nice. Just really showing how much they increase in the second half. Nimrod level 48, more endurance, attack, HP. So we 3-0 the Psychs, Beast 2 on the Goers, and the Fangs and Glories just tie it up 0-0. No need for goals. What a match. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And when you come back, we're going to be playing more Blitzball. Till next time.